Welcome to the ASW Vault. In June 2021, Sebastian Deleersnyder joined us to talk about the OWASP Software Assurance Maturity Model. It's organized across 15 security practices, each with their own activities. We talk a lot about its secure build and secure deployment activities, especially since those are the areas that require a lot of collaboration with dev teams. After all, nobody wants to increase build times, even for the sake of security, and whether security will stop a build or block a deploy should be based on a discussion of risk. Ultimately, it's a maturity model, which means a lot of the SAMM activities are attainable even for small orgs. Find out how Seba has been leveraging the SAMM and how to get involved. Enjoy ASW 154 and stick around. New episodes are in the queue.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Seba is a co-founder and CTO of Torian and a proponent of application security as a holistic endeavor. He started the Belgian OWASP chapter, was a member of the OWASP Foundation Board, and gave several presentations on application security. Seba also co-organized the yearly Security and Hacker BrewCon conference in Belgium. With a background in development and many years of experience in security, he has trained countless developers to create software more securely. He has led OWASP projects such as OWASP SAMM, thereby truly making the world a little bit safer. Now he is adapting application security models to the evolving field of DevOps and is also focused on bringing threat modeling to a wider audience. Hello, Seba. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
We're very happy to have you here to talk about software assurance maturity models. And I think it's no surprise that given ransomware and given a lot of the vulns that we've seen over decades, that there does need to be an approach to good application security. And what seems to be pretty neat, or maybe what seems to be a void, is how do we know when we're secure? And I know that's not quite exactly what something like the OWASP SAMM is going for, but I think the OWASP SAMM is giving us maybe a roadmap to get to better or more secure software. Let's just start us off with maybe a little bit of background what the SAMM is, and we can go from there in terms of how we should start thinking about it as either a roadmap or maybe a better metaphor than that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, Mike. Indeed. So SAMM, as its name states, software assurance maturity model is really a maturity model on really measuring where you are in terms of your software assurance maturity and like how secure is your process to create software. But it has been applied in several environments. We even had people applying it on totally different environments and systems. But going back to your question, a little bit the origin story or what the history is of OWASP SAMM, it's actually already here for over, I think we started in 2007, 2008 already, where I was not immediately involved. I reviewed the first version, but it actually was Praveer Chandra who created the first version and released it around 2007, 2008 as a first, I would say, project, one of the first flagship projects within OWASP SAMM. And since then, it has been used a lot in the OWASP community for, I would say, bootstrapping, but also in improving secure development lifecycle programs. And over the years, we took over, and I say we, so Bart de Win, one of the co-project leaders, and myself have taken over. A couple of other people also have helped over the last years. And then we have built really a whole core team and a community around the project as such. Mainly started in 2012, 2013 with that. And then that really evolved into a new version of OWASP SAMM. So SAMM version 2.0, which was released in January 2020 last year. So that's a little bit the history. We've really focused on creating, I would say, not only a community, but also a platform on how to create and improve the maturity model in itself. And involve, I would say, feedback from the community at large. So it's not something that we just thought up. It's something based on best practices of a whole lot of people that are involved in software security in the OWASP community.
Yeah, now you're describing, in the seeds of this starting 13, 14 years ago, and obviously the SAMM has changed, but so has development changed quite a bit too, both on just how much cloud native is a modern term of art, and it's pretty easy to just say that, and people mostly know what you're talking about, as well as kind of the CI/CD process as well. So I'm kind of curious, how when organizations are looking at something like a maturity model, tell us a little bit, how does something like the OWASP SAMM fit into what they're doing on the modern day? Meaning, do they actually have to deal with something, concepts that are 10 plus years old, or are some of these old concepts still applicable? And what's actually kept up with the modern tooling? And I realize that was probably about 3 or 4 questions all at once. So I'm going to give you 60 seconds to answer. Clock is
Well, I'll try to wrap that up in 60 seconds. It's both. It's yes and yes. We've I would say with the upgrade and change to 2.0, we've definitely taken into account I would say more modern ways of building and deploying software. So there's a whole new business function within OWASP SAMM, which is called build, which covers build, deployment, and metrics. And we've gotten rid of a couple of maybe a little bit older, like waterfall-y, audit-like aspects of OWASP SAMM version 1.0. Pravir was as a background, I had an auditor background, and there was a lot of okay, how do we control this? And that we got rid of in the second version. So we kept a little bit of the best parts that we know worked. And we've, I would say, modernized SAMM 2.0 with more modern ways of developing and deploying code. While at the same time, that was the biggest challenge, maintaining it, I would say, development and technology agnostic. So SAMM is really building blocks of activities and security practices that you can apply on the way that you develop and that you can apply to your software stack. So it's not going to explain to you how you do this in an AWS or Azure, I would say, environment, but that is generic enough to cover both those and others.
It is generic enough, but the SAMM does put up front that it's actually a very prescriptive model in the sense of here are some things that you should be doing. So how did you, maybe let's pick on that implementation business function, because you mentioned secure build, secure deployment. Maybe talk us through a little bit of that, and how can an organization start looking at a maturity model in the sense of this is what SAMM says you should be doing, or that prescriptive steps of these are the components to a good secure build, secure deployment, even though it's trying to be balancing that kind of technology agnostic approach to it.
Yeah, definitely. So indeed, there were a couple of things that we lacked in the previous version, so that we've added to the version 2.0. So with the build, I would say security practices, we've really focused on making sure that within your pipelines you also add in enough, I would say, hooks to do security checking, to do, I would say, verifications and assurance around the security that you, I would say, need to build into your software. Also, we've added in that specific secure build software dependencies. And so making sure that you know what's in your software, and that you have a bill of materials, or what we call an SBOM, and that you evaluate what you've used in terms of security is really critical aspects to current, I would say, modern software. So in those aspects, we've, I would say, upgraded the secure build with those security practices. With secure deployment, here we've also added security tests, but also added secret management, because obviously you will need to do secret and credentials and user management whenever you deploy software in any environment. It may be serverless, it may be even old school servers that you deploy on. But you will need to indeed okay, how do we limit access to those environments? How do we keep those secrets, I would say, manageable? So that's part of secure deployment. And last but not least, defect management is part really of how I would say the build practice is structured in SAMM. So you need to know what's going wrong. You need to know what kind of metrics you're using, and you need to create a feedback cycle into the way that you're developing. And that definitely should resonate with any DevOps shop. It's creating the feedback cycle. It's making sure that, okay, you can make mistakes, but you learn from those, and you have a feedback cycle into the way that you're building and deploying software.
Yeah, I think that feedback cycle for sure. And the other thing that I think will also resonate with modern DevOps, you were mentioning tools, or at least touch points or automation points within the build process to tap into tools. So I want to take that as a little bit of a segue into saying, or to asking, what tools are there to do this? I'm going to say to do a maturity model, which I realize is maybe a strange formulation. But what I mean by that is in the sense of either tools to figure out how are we doing? What's our score, so to speak, as well as what are the tools? Is this a lot of just the security team goes and interviews, the kinder version, the DevOps team, and asking, are you doing this? Are you doing this other thing? Are you doing this other thing? Or are there also tools that can help us actually meet a lot of these different maturity levels throughout the different business functions?
Yeah, I would hope that indeed that the setup is not that the security team interrogates the development team. That's not really going to be very effective. No. In terms of tooling, and I would say from the beginning, we had an assessment tool, and a tool that I would say helps a team to create a roadmap. And it's built on the tool that's being used far the most, I would say, throughout the world. It's based on Microsoft Excel. Now, I know that is probably not the most popular tool with developers, but it's quite useful. There are a couple of people in the community that also have migrated this to a Google spreadsheet, but that's not the only way to do this. There's a couple of other, I would say, tools that have been built as a standalone software that you can deploy in your own environment as a web application, or you can host somewhere that I would say creates an assessment questionnaire and that you can fill in yourself as a team, or as I would say, team that I would say is going to be responsible for setting up SAMM and introducing SAMM to go through together with the development team. But I would say in general, the tools are not the biggest asset of OWASP SAMM. It's really the setup around it. It's the questions that are asked within the different security practices that should trigger people, okay, I need to probably improve my training on a way that it's relevant for my developers. I need to probably include software security tips that are relevant to the developments stacks and the software stacks that my teams are doing. So the tool there is really the questions that we've came up with to measure OWASP SAMM. And the biggest change between 2.0 and 1.0 is that where 1.0 we really measured, I would say, coverage. How many people did you train to a combination of quality and coverage? So not only did you train your people, but was it effective in terms of what you needed to have? Did they understand what was necessary? That's something that's quite important, and probably is I would say the biggest change between 1.0 and 2.0, and has also been included in the tooling that we've created so far, and the tooling that's also being created. There's a couple of our sponsors, but also I know of other organizations that are also now building extra tools on the OWASP SAMM stack. What we've also done is to support that is that OWASP SAMM itself is not a monolithic document anymore. We have, I would say, deployed everything on a GitHub repository as, I would say, standalone YAML files. And you could also, I would say, easily convert them to JSON files. But the way we've created and I would say reshuffled the way we created the SAMM 2.0 is that it's based on a lot of data files that can be easily consumed by any tool whatsoever to use within your organization. So be it in your own Confluence, in your own whatever, I would say, bug tracker, it should be easier and easier to consume SAMM 2.0 than before. And before it was just one big PDF file. Now it's a whole lot of different files that we use to generate one PDF, but also generate the website, generate the toolbox, and so on.
So if anything, the managing all the content has matured for the software assurance maturity model.
I would say, as a maturity model, we've probably grown from a level 1 to a level 2.
That is good. One of the things I do want to start to get into an aspect of the metrics and perhaps some interpretation of them. And one of the things that stands out about the 2.0 version is the quality aspects of the metric. And you were just touching on that, talking about rather than did you train all the developers to how good was that training? Was that training actually effective? And so there's a couple questions that I can imagine orgs probably come to you with or come to this type of document with in the sense of how secure do we need to be? How mature do we need to be? Or what does it mean if we're scoring very low? Are we going to be compromised? Are things terrible? Help us a little bit kind of interpret the sense of what a maturity model, how to use that maturity level within an organization.
So there's one thing that's important to understand when you start using SAMM is that it's something you need to, I would say, adapt and customize to your own, I would say risk profile. So not everyone is going to aim for SAMM level 3 on all 15 security practices. That's just not feasible and also would be very expensive. So the main question and the biggest challenge, I would say, with any SAMM implementation that I've seen so far is how far do you need to go? And what is the level that is good enough for your organization? And not only for your organization, but also for the software that you're creating. So one of the security practices in OWASP SAMM is part of, and let me have a look, is part of design threat assessment. In threat assessment, there's a specific stream which is called application risk profile, where you upfront, whenever you're going to implement any, I would say, product or software or system, you need to at least have an idea what's going to be the risk level of that application. And based on that, you might have very simple buckets like high, medium, low risk level. You're going to adapt the way you're going to apply security activities. And so you're probably not going to do threat modeling for all your applications. You're going to do that for your high-risk applications first. So it's a more granular approach based on application risk level and your organization and system risk profile. And there, once you have that, and once you realize that, and that's something that's really, I would say, in the core of OWASP SAMM, that is risk-driven. Once you have that, then it becomes easier to find the level of maturity that you're going to aim for. And it's going to be different when you're going to create like a mobile app for home banking, for a banking, I would say, application, versus to create an application to pick up lunch with your colleagues over your break. So there's different risk levels, and there's going to be different, I would say, target measures for your SAMM implementation.
That makes sense. And I think, the common theme within security is that context matters. So, it depends is a common retort in these types of questions. And so, but I still do want to ask, organizations still, I think, have that immediate feeling of how do we compare against someone else? So if you do have these relatively, your app risk profiles are, have the context of the business, context of this mobile app versus this web application, this public API, the type of data they're handling, so on. I could go on. But when we get down to that, am I doing enough? Or how do I compare? If I do have a mobile banking app, how do I compare against the other mobile banking app or the fintech space, things like that? Are these good questions to ask about the SAMM? Is this a good way to use the SAMM? Or what's a better way of thinking about this particular area when an organization looks at the benchmarks or looks at their metrics?
Look, that is a perfect question, and it's a question we get a lot, and it also fits into what we're doing, and also based on that, we've started and already a couple of years ago, we started with the OWASP SAMM project a track called the SAMM Benchmark, and the SAMM Benchmark is I would say, an initiative within the project to gather public SAMM measurements from everyone that wants to share within the community, to share in an anonymous way. So we've set up that mechanisms, the whole, I would say, architecture and the data model has been created for that, to gather different SAMM assessments and SAMM roadmaps to really answer the question, okay, I have now done my OWASP implementation. How do I compare with my peers? How do I compare with others in my industry? So, and that's the advantage of SAMM, and also SAMM being part of the OWASP community, is we have a very large community of a lot of organizations that are using OWASP products. So our hope and our intention really is to gather a critical mass of SAMM data to, I would say, kickstart a first baseline of the OWASP benchmark track. So Brian Glass, who is part of the, I would say, the core team, who's also been working a lot on data management in the OWASP top 10 within OWASP, is gathering this information, setting up the architecture to actually fulfill that need, that particular question. And that's really, I would say, that next to improved tooling are going to be the two core aspects that are going to focus on in the next couple of months and years to improve SAMM.
Cool. I've got some additional questions. I want to make sure, John, you can jump in here if you got something burning as well.
No, it's funny. Your last two questions are actually you're in my head again. I guess I'd go a little further on. So the idea around knowing what your peers is doing is interesting. Let me throw this out there, Seb, see what you think. Is there an additional dimension to that of because as I was looking through the model, the maturity of an organization, not just from the maturity of their code, but what about the maturity of the organization themselves? In other words, a young startup is going to be more, so that while they might be new and young, they might actually be more mature than, or it might be easier for them to become more mature than, say, I don't know, a bank that's been around for 100 years. Do you see that type of differentiation playing into the model itself?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you're touching upon a very good point there, and it's I've definitely simplified the way how do I compare, because one of the, I would say, what you really need to take care of when you implement SAMM is that you define that you have a very good scope. Are you going to do this for a product? Are you going to do this on a team level, on a business unit level, on an organization level? And that kind of metadata, capturing that metadata together with the other SAMM metrics, is going to be really critical for the benchmark project and track for you to be able to compare yourself. Because if you don't have that additional data, just besides the SAMM measurements on the 15 practices, is going to be very hard. So you need to know what kind of team level or business unit level am I comparing myself with, and that's really where the, I would say, the bigger numbers come into play. If we don't have enough I would say, data sets for mobile development for startups, then it's going to be hard to compare yourself. Whereas if we do have enough of those, it's going to be more interesting.
I'm curious too, thinking of the different sizes and maturities of organizations. We're talking about a software assurance maturity model, and there is security that's explicitly stated in a couple of these areas. But what if you're looking at, if someone who's like the VP of engineering, and they're figuring out how to make their first security hire? I would imagine they would still, even without that security hire, there's a lot of steps in here that could still be done just as a pure engineering function, thinking of supplier security, secrets management, deployment process, build process, software integrity, those types of things. So have you seen that from, I guess, where have you seen organizations, small or large, or on one end of the spectrum of just the org's maturity level, where have they started? Meaning, do they pick a business function and say, cool, we're going to start with governance, go all in, or we're going to hit implementation because that's a very nice engineering type of thing to go? Or what are some ideas there?
Yeah. So there's no one path that fits all, but it would definitely make sense. And what I've seen in implementations and from what I've heard from a lot of other implementations, there's a couple of logical security practices to start with. The strategy and metrics part of governance is the first one in most of the cases, because there you get buy-in. If you don't have buy-in, if you don't have at least your VP or your CISO or your head of application development being understanding why this is necessary and also providing you with the resources and the mandate to do this, you probably shouldn't start this. If and when you have that, that's the best way to start, because it will set out the foundation to do the next steps. And most of the cases, next steps are education and guidance. So for people understanding what it is about and to help them, to also start up with what we call a network of application security champions as part of the education and guidance. And then I would say reinforcing the security testing. I would say in most organizations, hopefully, crossing fingers here, security testing is already part of any security initiative, but it should be reinforced and then complemented with the threat assessment part, which I highlighted earlier. So focusing on high-risk applications first and starting with threat modeling, understanding what can go wrong, and getting your team on a shared vision on security together with the architects, the DevOps engineers, the developers, the testers, is going to bring you it's going to be a big step ahead in any software development practice. So those are the four main areas we've seen, and there's definitely others as well, toolings, dependencies, checking, and so on, obviously. But those are the ones that we see are typical part of any SDL bootstrap initiatives or improvement initiatives.
Cool. Now, the OWASP SAMM also has user days, and I think you just had one recently, about 2 weeks ago. And so clearly, a lot of these, I think the topics that come up on these user days are about what are practitioners doing? How have they actually applied SAMM in practice? I'm curious, what are some recent highlights that have come out of that, and sort of how is that kind of shaping the future of SAMM, or things that to be looking forward to over the next couple of months or years?
Yeah, definitely. So like I said in the beginning, it's all about creating and I would say involving the community of OWASP SAMM. And indeed, last May 27th, we had the second actually. We had a full user day last year. That was 8 hours in a row, beginning of COVID. Now we had a 4-hour session, the spring user day, where we had people. We had a couple of really interesting topics being covered, like DevOps security by Timo Pegel, who is involved in the project. Then somebody who really was going to focus on, how do you scope a SAMM assessment? Then we had somebody from the core project team explaining how actually we're now moving to a new way of iterating over new releases and the new, I would say, GitHub repository. We even had a lady coming to explain to us how they use SAMM in K-12 environments, which, to our surprise, apparently is something that you can apply SAMM on. And then one talk was also on how to secure your CI/CD pipeline itself. There are a couple of aspects that you need to take into account. And obviously, there are some can help you there, and we've covered that a little bit in the beginning. So there was an interesting talk about that as well. So we had that in May, but we're also going to have OWASP SAMM fall user day in probably October, November timeframe. So whenever that comes up, we'll let you know.
No, that sounds neat. Yeah, and that seems to be surprising. That topic of bringing, applying SAMM to schools was very topical, since everything over the past year had so quickly had to move to online. And so I think that must have been a pretty impressive scramble to figure out the threat modeling. What are the riskiest areas to deal with, and then move from there in this perspective of protecting students' privacy, protecting data, protecting communications from being griefed or interrupted by people that aren't part of the school. So I guess it's neat to see that a project like this has applications beyond just the mobile banking app that we use as one example, or even just other standard, call them Silicon Valley type of tech applications that might be coming out of here.
Yeah, software is everywhere. So it's and then having something like SAMM as a basis is for all of, I would say non-traditional ways of software and developing and deploying software is also in this case proved to be an interesting framework to do that.
Indeed. And I think there was one last question topic part of this that I think is that comparing to BSIMM, for example, one of the things I read is that BSIMMs are typically done annually, and the OWASP SAMM was kind of looking at like a 2 to 3 year cadence for reviewing. Help me out just a little bit here of, if somebody wants to get into SAMM, you mentioned already getting buy-in, so getting the organization at the CISO level, CTO level to say, yes, we care about doing this. But then, and we have a model now with these business functions, these streams to flow down. What sort of cadence could we be looking at here, or what's sort of a path forward for in terms of the expectations for the timeline for going through this process?
Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference between, I would say, cadence between BSIMM and SAMM. BSIMM is really based on the synopsis team gathering extra information from their customers, and then I would say adding that to their model. They do that typically on a yearly basis, which is perfectly fine and interesting. With SAMM, what we're doing is we are really gathering a lot of input from the community, and it's still I would say volunteer-driven activity. It's not going that fast, but it's building upon a lot of, I would say, knowledge of a lot of practitioners all over the world, and not only, I would say, the synopsis customers. And the way that I would say you and anyone who's involved in OWASP or in AppSec is to really participate in the SAMM community and the OWASP community at large. And the best way to do this is to actually provide feedback and improvements on the SAMM model itself. And the way we're doing this is we're going to have much more frequent releases. So we're going to the really semantic versioning. So any, I would say, patches is going to be 2.1, 2.2. And any time when we are going to change or update the model itself, which is going to be expected probably like on a yearly or bi-yearly basis, we're going to upgrade the model itself. So it's going to be more frequent than in the past. We went from 1 to 1.5, to 1.1 and 1.5 in about 5-8 years. Then we went to 2 in 3 years, and now we're probably going to 2.1 in the next couple of months, and probably like maybe a 2.2 in next years based on feedback. But it's going to be community driven. It's not something that we as a core team are going to implement. It's going to be based on what you think the SAMM is going to need in the next months and years.
Very cool. And I think, Seba, you've given us in 30 minutes, I think, a good introduction and some great insights on the OWASP SAMM project itself, as well as where it's headed and how to participate. So I want to thank you for joining us and sharing what you've done on the project.
Thank you, and I really want to thank everyone who contributed to SAMM itself. We have a core team of 10 to 15 people, but also hundreds of volunteers who've reviewed and contributed to the SAMM project over the last couple of years. So thank you to them.